Russian President Vladimir Putin has come up more than a few times during his presidential campaign. And then today, well, he may have guaranteed that he stays prominent in this election year, especially as a topic. You see, Putin blaming Ukraine for the deaths of 2 Russian service members as he amasses tanks on the border of Crimea. It's the biggest escalation of tension since Russia annexed, or some would even say invaded, Crimea 2 years ago. So what exactly is Vladimir Putin up to? Joining me now, Captain Chuck Nash and James Kirchick. James, let me ask you, Vladimir Putin has watched our elections very closely. He understands the sort of tensions that are building here. For him to make this sort of a move under the guise of somehow retaliation, what do you make of it all?
Well, I think let's remember it was 8 years ago this week in August that the Russians invaded and occupied 20% of the territory in Georgia, which was also during the Olympics, the Beijing Olympics. August is a strange month in Russian history. A lot happens throughout history. From the beginning of, World War I started in August, and there's many other events. They know that we're distracted. It's the summer. People are on vacation. President Obama is in Martha's Vineyard. So there would be precedent for this. And I also think Vladimir Putin knows that he has about 4 months left of the Obama administration. This is a lame duck president now who certainly does not want to deal with a major international crisis at the end of his presidency. So if I were Vladimir Putin and I was trying to stage some sort of military incursion into Ukraine, now might be a good time to pull it off.
Captain Nash, what does he get out of this, though? I mean, how would that influence the election? And do you think, he really would believe that there would be no response from America?
It's possible, Charles, because if you take a look at Europe, Europe is totally incapable of defending itself. We've got NATO, and back when I was active duty, we used to joke that NATO stood for no action, talk only. You look at it now, the decreasing amount of money that they're putting into their defense, lower and lower percentages of GDP, something that Donald Trump has even started talking about early in his campaign about how Europe is just not standing up. They couldn't even do Libya without us coming in to bail them out, and then they ran out of bombs after the first 2 weeks. So they're a paper tiger. Putin's looking strong. He's now got Erdogan, President Erdogan from Turkey up there to bolster it. So he's looking at a real geopolitical gain here, because it's the permanent annexation of the Crimea. And as your other guest has said, August is a good time to do it, because by the time anybody gets around to doing anything, it's going to be winter, and everybody knows the Russian winter. Yeah,
we've seen a couple of examples of that throughout history. But James, with respect to NATO then, what does argue that perhaps its mission is not as antiquated as many people are saying it is maybe that it still has, maybe it has to evolve its role with respect to terrorism and ISIS and so forth, but also its core mission, maybe that's still relevant as well?
I think NATO's mission has never been more relevant since the end of the Cold War. You have Russia annexing territory for the first time since the end of World War II. That's a pretty big deal. And they're waging a land war in Europe. So I would argue, contrary to what Donald Trump says, NATO is not obsolete. NATO is probably the most important it's been since 1989. And I think NATO is actually doing a lot in the countries which are NATO members. In the Baltic states and Poland, we're seeing an increase of NATO troops and NATO supplies being sent on rotation to reassure those members that they'll be defended from any sort of Russian attack. So I think NATO is absolutely crucial. Ukraine's not a member of NATO. We have to recall that. So there's really not much NATO can do to intervene in this sort of conflict.
Well, so Captain Nash, that means we watch him, Vladimir Putin, take the whole country?
Well, I think what's going to happen is he's probably going to annex some of the eastern part of Ukraine just as a ploy. I don't think he really wants to take that over and have to deal with that. He's got enough problems at home. But by doing this, Charles, what he's doing is he is putting the Baltic states, Moldova, and a few other places on square notice. And if he were to move against one of the Baltic states, that would place NATO squarely in the middle of the whole Article 5 mutual self-defense thing. And I'll bet you there are a lot of people who are NATO members in Europe that are just praying that that day never comes.
I know. Well, you know what? The good news is that at least some of the Baltic states are paid up on their dues. Guys, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.